welcome back. I want to talk today about community. There's a quote, a proverb that's really meaningful to me, and it comes from the book of Proverbs, and it simply says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another." We are relational beings. We're created to be in relationship with others. We're at our best in good, positive, meaningful relationships with others. And that's true when it comes to problem solving and treasure hunting, both the metaphorical and the literal type, and truth seeking, and all of those deep endeavors that we pursue in our lives. Doing it in community matters. And one of the things I wanted to do in this video was to take you on a little tour of how this has worked in history. In fact, if we look at some of the most brilliant minds in history, we find that they gathered in intentional communities. So I'm going to take you on a tour of 5 of these communities, and then at the end of the video, please stay on, I'm going to take you through the 5 traits that these communities have in common. And it can be a guide for us today as we think about informal and formal communities that we shape around ourselves. Sometimes it can be friends and people that we know, sometimes affinity groups, people with a shared interest or a passion. This can be really powerful, so stay with me. The first one that I'll talk about is the one that I've mentioned in a prior video. Ben Franklin, I have read his autobiography more than probably almost any other book on the planet. I've read it for decades, and I would just read it over and over again. For some reason, I was just intrigued by what he represented about that particular era in American history, and with his flaws and his strengths and all of the above. I was just fascinated to read it from his own hand and his own mind. Well, one of the things that Ben Franklin created is a group called Junto, also known as the Leather Apron Club, and it was founded in the 1720s, maybe 1726, 1727, and it was a group of different people from different backgrounds. There were writers and more intellectuals and tradesmen, and they would meet every week to discuss issues of how to grow and improve themselves, but also civic engagement, how to improve their communities and their town, and really just to engage in mutual learning. And it became this practice where people would bring a paper and take turns, and they would discuss it together, and it just led to really rich discussion. I could be mistaken, but I believe that that's actually the roots of the American Philosophical Association, or Philosophical Association. But again, I could be mistaken on that piece, and maybe it was just sort of a parallel or something. A second one is one that many people know who are fans of their work. If you are a big fan of Lord of the Rings or the Chronicles of Narnia, you know C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. Well, they were both parts of a group as well that met regularly in a pub. They were called the Inklings, and they met to read their works aloud, and then they would challenge each other's ideas. They would help refine their storytelling skills, and along the way, refine their use of words and their thinking and their communication skills, and help them each grow and become better writers along the way. And there were other people, so Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and there was Charles Williams, and I'm not sure the names of others who were part of that group, but it was a regular gathering, again, even in a pub, and just sharing their work with one another and discussing it. A third one is the Lunar Society. This was in 18th century England, and it was a group of scientists and inventors. There was James Watt and Erasmus Darwin, Josiah Wedgwood. They gathered under the full moon, hence the Lunar Society, to share ideas that would eventually fuel the Industrial Revolution. And again, you get these people gathering together, talking about ideas that matter on a scheduled basis, sharpening one another. A fourth one is called the Bloomsbury Group. It was an early 20th century circle of writers. There was Forster and Virginia Woolf and others, and they championed intellectual freedom. They were big champions for the artistry of their work, of their creative work. They obviously engaged in and philosophical debate and sharpening one another in their thinking. So a regular meeting. And then there was also one that you may have heard of called the Vienna Circle. Some lesser known names there, so I won't go through the names of them, lesser known to many of you. But it was in the 20s and the 30s, and it was a philosophical group who really shaped a number of movements in philosophy around logical positivism. You can Google that if you want to learn more about it, and just emphasizing scientific rigor and reason. And I don't necessarily agree with the thoughts and the ideas that came from some of these philosophers in that group, but they were pretty brilliant people who sharpened one another by gathering regularly. And those are just 5. We could go on and on. It's kind of actually amazing, awe-inspiring, and striking to go through history and see how many of the most influential people actually had a group like this, one or more groups like this, where they met regularly. That this myth of someone just kind of going in a room alone and doing all the work without getting any real feedback from other thinkers, sharpening one another, sparring with one another intellectually, it really is predominantly a myth. There's a smaller number of people who just sort of did it on their own. Instead, people gathered regularly. So I'm going to give you 5 traits that all these groups had in common, even though they were quite different groups, different philosophically, they had different ideas and different structures. But here are the things that they had in common that I jotted down as I was just sort of studying them a little bit. 1, each group gathered around some kind of shared interest, whether it was scientific revolution, storytelling, truth-seeking, personal improvement and growth. There was some kind of shared goal that they all had. Maybe more than one of those, but it was a shared goal. They had some measure of focus. It wasn't just interesting people getting together and hanging out. They had some kind of purpose that was stated. Second one is that they did regular meeting. Now, they didn't all meet weekly necessarily, but they had a scheduled time, a monthly or weekly, and they would commit to it, put it on their calendars and commit and try to show up regularly. A third one is that they all had some form of conversation. It wasn't just a person lecturing and everyone just quietly listened. It was actually about growth and improvement individually and as a group. So there was open discussion. They critiqued one another's thoughts and ideas and works, and in that process, they grew together. Fourth one is, while some of these groups, the people didn't always like each other or get along, generally, as I've tried to understand these different groups, and I would argue that it's good when you're forming a group, is that there can be some measure of mutual respect. You don't have to agree with the other people or share all the same beliefs and values, but respect their commitment to the pursuit of truth or the pursuit of that shared goal and purpose, and respect their role in the group. And then the fifth one is one of the things that I think is intriguing is all of the groups that I listed, these were not just people who gathered and talked about ideas and then went on to their normal life. No, these were groups that fueled creative efforts, scientific creations, inventions, other things like this. So this was, there's a quote from, I think, a guy named Lewin, or maybe Lewin, who said at one point that there's nothing more practical than a good theory. Sometimes people think the theoretical and the philosophical is not relevant for your everyday person. But I think that's absolutely false, that a good theory is incredibly practical, and it leads to practical next steps, to creations, to solutions, to problem solving, to other things like that. So what these groups did is that they talked about these ideas and the like with the goal of helping refine skills and abilities that can actually be applied and can be used to solve real problems, to create new solutions, to discover truth that they've yet to discover, and to discover those metaphorical treasures. I don't know any of these groups that gathered regularly, but if you wanted to be part of one, to be part of a group that searches for actual treasures, well, there are lots of those groups as well. I'd encourage you to think about this. Do you have a group like this right now? And if not, what would it take for you to join one or maybe to be the founder of one?